Stars that have put your best foot forward and taken steps today to end the ivory trade. My name is Travers, and I want to thank you all for the effort you've shown today, showing your concern as part of all these I Worry marches around the world, organised by the wonderful David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. I've actually known Daphne Sheldrick since the 1970s, and she is one of my wildlife heroes. I've been asked to speak to you briefly about the wildlife tragedy, a massive crisis that is unfolding before our eyes. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes. If you're really hot, move into the shade. I first went to Africa when I was a child with my mother and father, Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, when they starred in the film Born Free. That's when I saw my first elephant. I was age 5. Nearly 50 years later, the wild plains and forests of Africa, 50 years ago rather, they seemed endless, and the number of elephants seemed limitless. Ten years later in Kenya, I saw my first poached elephant. A massive, macabre, stinking pile of rotting flesh, staining the ground, the stench causing me to catch my breath, assaulting my senses. That was the start of a poaching epidemic that would rage across Africa through the 1970s and 80s, causing the continent's elephant population to be cut in half in just 10 years, which belatedly led to questions being asked. Where are all the elephants? Who is doing all the poaching? Where are the markets? What on earth is going on? On the one hand, it was really simple. Demand for ivory was relentlessly emptying Africa of its elephants. However, it was also complex. There were many actors at play, a perfect storm, if you will. Weak wildlife law enforcement agencies on the ground were unable to resist the poaching pressure. Widespread corruption at all levels made it difficult to ensure that resources reached the places where they were urgently needed. Some scientists, conservation organizations, trade monitoring organizations were in denial. Famous organizations, once we trusted and that should have known better, continued to support a sustainable ivory trade, subject to monitoring that would permit limited amounts of ivory to be shipped to the carving centers of the Middle East and the markets of the Far East. The international body, we've heard it talked about today, responsible for controlling and, if necessary, ending the trade in wildlife products, such as ivory, CITES, the Swiss-based UN Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, continued to prevaricate on the issue as to whether trade should be suspended or not. Perhaps in part due to the fact that it receives significant amounts of money from the ivory carving industry itself. And the scientists argued about the numbers. Were elephants really in a bad way? How many elephants were there? As one said at the time, ivory crisis, what crisis? Then a number of things happened. A pivotal study by world expert Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton put the facts on the table in a way not seen before. His meticulous research revealed the state of the decline, from 1.3 million elephants in 1979 to just over 600,000 in 1989, just 10 years later. He predicted that if the slaughter continued, many African countries would lose their elephant populations entirely. He pinpointed elephant poaching and the ivory trade as the two most significant factors in that devastating decline. Other voices began to speak out. Daphne Sheldrick, the wife of the late, great David Sheldrick, told of her experiences trying to save the growing number of elephant orphans, as we've heard about, in her care, each of them a traumatized victim of the slaughter. The Environmental Investigation Agency released damning, never-before-seen footage from inside the ivory carving factories, revealing the industrial scale of the whole wretched enterprise. The President of Kenya, encouraged by Dr. Richard Leakey, the dynamic, newly appointed head of the recently created Kenya Wildlife Service, set fire to a massive pile of confiscated ivory in a blaze of publicity that caught the imagination of the world. In the UK, Friends, a campaign spearheaded by Born Free, but with the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, Care for the Wild and others, began to collect signatures calling for the ivory trade to be banned at the upcoming CITES meeting to be held in Lausanne, Switzerland in September 1989. The Tanzanian government, represented by the dynamic, principled and now sadly missed Dr. Costa Malai, came forward with detailed proposals for such a ban. Momentum was building. The question was, would it be enough to turn the tide? I remember it all very well. I was there. I borrowed a car. I drove to Switzerland to attend the meeting, my first CITES meeting. Why not fly, I hear you say? Because I had a precious cargo. Those first few signatures have become 600,000 names on a petition, each one for each surviving African elephant, gathered in just a few short months in support of the ban. Remember, this was in the days before email. This was in the days before e-petitions. I had 600,000 individual handwritten names on sheets of paper, and I personally delivered them. Woo! Yeah. It made a difference. It mattered. It counted. As did the efforts of so many who attended that meeting, who shouted, "Ban, ban, ban," from the other side of the locked doors we were not allowed into certain parts of the meeting. Of course, those who still clung to the idea that the ivory trade could be regulated did their best to derail the ban, including organizations that proclaimed to be protectors of the world's wildlife. But it was meant to be. I can still hear the applause ringing around the massive conference room when the result of the final vote was announced. It seemed that the battle for the elephants had been won. So why has it gone so terribly wrong? How have we managed to turn victory into defeat? Well, one word: greed. That pervasive, insidious, malignant, and deadly sin. The people who coveted ivory, the people who never wanted the trade to be banned, bided their time. And as elephant poaching subsided, prices for illegal ivory collapsed and some populations stabilized and began to recover, they began to whisper in siren voices that now things are better. It seems a shame to have all that ivory sitting in government stores, that elephant conservation needs resources, that limited sales, very carefully regulated sales, of course, were the perfect answer. And so the rot set in. As we've heard, the one-off sale took place in 1999, about 60 tons of ivory to Japan, under the watchful eye of the CITES Secretariat, who reassuringly claimed that they would count every tusk into the shipping container, and guess what? Every tusk out of the container at the other end, just to make sure that no ivory was being smuggled. And in doing so, they utterly and entirely missed the point. No one in their right mind was going to try and slip extra ivory into that container, but it was the message the sale sent out that ivory was once more on the market that started to dismantle the credibility and integrity of the ban. However, truthfully, the visible impact of that sale in 1989 was very modest. Poaching rates didn't seem to rise. Ivory prices stayed low. Had my fears, the fears of so many people, been misfounded, it would be 10 further years before our predictions would be proved right. Emboldened perhaps by that apparent success of the 1999 sale, CITES approved a second one-off sale in 2002, which took place in 2008, when over 100 tons of ivory were exported by 4 Southern African countries to Japan and, crucially, for the first time to China, a recently approved ivory trading partner. China proved to be the game changer. Until 1999, China hadn't even featured as an end market for ivory. Japan was the only game in town, and it was clear that over time, the Japanese desire for ivory had become increasingly muted. However, imagine this. Double-digit economic growth in China for more than 10 years has created a new force to be reckoned with, a massive and rapidly growing Chinese middle class, hundreds of millions of people with disposable income that they can spend on automobiles, on air conditioning, oh and yes, if they choose, on prestige products that have formerly been the preserve of the elite, including ivory. At the time of that second sale, I actually went and personally argued this with the UK minister of the time responsible, and I said that approving China as an ivory trading partner would have fearful consequences. But those pro-trade siren voices had had their malignant effect. The minister argued, and this is what she said. She said, the tonnage involved in this one-off sale of legal ivory is significant. And if it can go some way to satisfy the demand for ivory within the domestic markets of China and Japan over the next few years, the demand for illegal ivory will be reduced. We hope this will have a knock-on effect on the levels of poaching of elephants. Her predictions were disastrously wrong. Far from satisfying demand was stimulated and elephant poaching has gone through the roof. The volume of illegal ivory in trade has hit 25-year highs, and the price being paid for 1 kilo of illegal ivory is 1,000% higher now than the legal sale prices of just a few years ago. From that moment on, the floodgates opened and we are back to fighting the ivory wars, except there are only 400,000 elephants left to protect. Some people say we can't win. I say we can.
Yep. Yeah.
Although the situation is bad, some things have changed. No one now denies that Africa's elephants are facing a crisis. Even those who are apologists for the trade 20 years ago are welcome latecomers to the notion that the only solution is to ban. And ivory is no longer an issue that only excites conservationists, animal lovers, us lot. Look who's speaking out on the subject. Hillary in Chelsea. Secretary of State Kerry. British Foreign Secretary William Hague, the President of Kenya and the First Lady, the Presidents of Uganda, Botswana, Gabon, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, the President of the United States of America, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and more. We have globally respected conservation leaders, including, where is he? Jim, the elephant man. He's a hero today. Dame Daphne Sheldrake, Ian Douglas Hamilton, the man who sounded the alarm all those years ago. Born Free USA, Humane Society of the United States, Defenders of Wildlife, the Animal Welfare Institute, Greenpeace, Wild Aid, Species Survival Network, Prince William, Prince Charles, David Beckham, Virginia McKenna, my old mum, Katie Cleary, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jackie Chan, Ron Ornstein, Yao Ming, the Chinese NBA star, Li Bingbing. The list goes on and on and on, and they're all saying one thing: end the trade. And as has been touched on, there is another factor that's making a massive difference. Poaching elephants and smuggling ivory is an organized, illegal wildlife crime that is now recognized as one of a list of organized crimes that the world is confronted with and the world is determined to defeat, along with gun running, drug trafficking, money laundering, and people smuggling. These activities not only sustain the criminal networks that suck the life out of decent societies that respect the rule of law, but they provide money for the insurgents, the bandits, the terrorists who are determined to destabilize vulnerable parts of our world and threaten all of us in order to achieve their terrible, brutal, and self-serving goals. At last, the international community realizes that the impact of elephant poaching affects us all. It is up to us to do something about it. The dreadful killings by Al-Shabaab militants at the Westgate Mall in Nairobi were almost certainly made possible with money acquired through selling poached ivory. Already we've seen a number of highly significant measures: President Obama's executive order, the efforts of the Clinton Global Initiative. Countries such as Kenya and Gabon, they're changing their legislation, they're making the punishment fit the crime. The government of India will be hosting an international meeting on elephants in about a month's time. The British government will be doing so in February. I expect a lot to come from those initiatives. We should demand a lot come from those initiatives. Yes, and those 6 tons of ivory that have been gathered by the US government, they need to be crushed. Crush the ivory trade. Of course, there is much more to be done, not least by the Chinese government, which could take a leadership role and with the stroke of a pen, declare ivory sales, imports, and exports illegal. So, what we can't do, though, is stand back and wait for something to happen. People are stepping up to be counted. Each and every one of you here today and at all the other I Worry events around the world organized by the David Sheldrake Wildlife Trust, all the people who come to the Bloody Ivory website, all the people who donate to anti-poaching efforts in Kenya, in Burkina Faso, in Ethiopia. We are all part of this issue, and we can choose to be part of the solution. No more buying ivory. No more selling ivory. No more wearing ivory. No more elephant poaching or hunting. Yes, I saw that show the other day with the guy shooting the elephant and having champagne afterwards. It's just wrong. We all have an obligation to care for elephants, to care for the natural world, to protect other species from the one species that can destroy them all, and that's us. Next. I'm coming to the end. They say that an elephant never forgets. I believe that to be true. So let's make sure that from this day forward, we don't forget the elephant. One young marcher here today, I don't know where he is, I'm going to look around for him, said, "The elephant is my favorite animal. We must not allow his dream to be destroyed." As was said, you open any kid's reading book, and E is for elephant, not for extinction. Thank you.